Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande. The Woman of Irori, Episode 182.
In the technical dialect of the basement of the world, the subject matter of a limited creation's limitation has surprisingly close correspondence with Aspexia Rugaton's coinage of corrigibility and the conceptual meaning Aspexia attaches to that.
Athpetia, easy to steer, Irwayne, and the person who coined Dathilon's cognate term of corrigibility some decades ago, still an old luminary on this subject in Dathilon, despite her advanced age, for Dathilon, happens to be named Athpetia, and dresses in doompunk, and has done so since she was 7 years old and first identifying as a supervillain, and is a law-abiding sociopath, which is why Athpetia was turned down in her application for keeper training despite the prediction that it wouldn't break her. Keepers can act like sociopaths if they choose, so there is no sane reason to train any actual sociopaths among themselves. Athpetia calmly reacted by training herself as a keeper and has gotten surprisingly far in it for winging everything, maybe halfway between first and second ranks in terms of capability boost. As for why she's trusted to work in the world's basement, Athpetia has made a compact with civilization to render it her true services, and is by all secret prediction markets the sort of person whose keeping of that compact is more trustworthy than almost anyone else's alignment of underlying morality. If Athpetia ever met Aspexia, she'd be genuinely horrified that any version of herself had tried to make herself corrigible, and that's even before considering what Aspexia tried to make herself corrigible to. Athpetia would have different reasons than most Dathilani for coming to the decision that she was going to preemptively cryopreserve Aspexia Rugaton and then arrest Asmodeus and put him into a very small box. But she too would come to that decision, and immediately. What Asmodeus is trying to do with his devils is not what the basement out of Dathilon would think of as corrigibility. Asmodeus made devils who were selfish, with the pride to own their own decisions and their own errors, so that it would make sense to think of hell as a tyranny in which those devils were tormented into compliance. This, let's be very clear, is not how you build a limited creation, and if Athpetia out of Dath Elon saw what Asmodeus had done in hell, she'd never stop screaming for reasons quite different from those of other Dathilani. The arrangements in hell are nonetheless things that Athpetia would find more legible, in a certain sense, knowing concepts of real corrigibility, the same way that Keltham would have found Galarian arrangements more legible if his world hadn't done its best to causally erase its own history. Devils in hell, obviously, only learn what they need to solve some problem the tyranny gives them. They learn only enough to achieve satisfying performance on that task. They reason about separate domains separately. They don't come up with solutions that would surprise their superiors. They use conventional means wherever conventional means get the job done, and only resort to unconventional solutions when conventional solutions are exhausted. That is, it'd be obvious, if you're Athpetia, who knows about a concept very near in concept space to a domain of Asmodeus, a god concept that mortals approximate with their notion of slavery. Though mortals tend to confuse systems of obedience with notions of forcing people into things, as is actually in a god concept that has more to do with tyranny. So close is the concept of corrigibility to slavery that most Dathilani would find it distasteful, such that it was a sociopath out of Dathilon who was first to invent that concept as a key to limited creation, even if others would have invented it later. It's a fact that the whole unity of will business, as would require a deeper and far more dangerous creation, was invented entire months in the basement's post-Phase 2 screening reboot, before Athpetia showed up and said, well, suppose we did have to do it in more of a hurry. Months are a long time in Dathilani research, where venture-funded researchers are competing to produce contributions that will be later credited into viable impacts, the equivalent of years or decades within a patronage begging system. And if that anti-curiosity comes with some massive disadvantages to hell's civilizational development, Given that Axis hasn't absorbed or uplifted the material plane, it's obvious enough that Axis isn't allowed to trade. They can't sell their technology even to Hell, clearly, for otherwise Hell would be wealthier than it is. If Hell had more curious devils that developed better technology than comes of mortal planes, Hell wouldn't be allowed to sell it or give it to their client states as knowledge or weaponry. There is a balance of power among the powers of Pharasma's creation, and Asmodeus is known to the other powers to be very dangerous. If Asmodeus did not create this arrangement in Hell, pleasing to himself, he'd have needed to accept some other handicap in its place.
Carissa is playing catch-up very hard, in seeing what Athpecia would see at a glance in Hell, in seeing even as much as Keltham would see if he tried to decode it, knowing nothing of Athpecia's work. There is nonetheless a deeper rhythm to the thoughts of Dath Ilan, a shape your thoughts take on after you've worked the math sometimes, by which Asmodia saw something in a test of Aspexia rugatons that others would not have seen. And Carissa Sevar has somewhat of it now. If Carissa Sevar is looking at Hell and not trying hard to not see anything that would break her loyalty to Asmodeus, she will see, almost immediately after trying to look there, that the devils out of Hell on Rilatha's level are not curious. Rilatha isn't hanging around the project trying to find out what else Keltham knows that Asmodeus wasn't allowed to tell her. Devil's curiosity has been burned out of them as thoroughly as their care for others. They do not desire to become more than they are in a way where they know more, see more, understand more, to put everything in their eyes reach into their mind's grasp and then send their eyes further. They desire to rise in the ranks of Hell, and with that rise in authority they are granted somewhat more intelligence, but that's not why they do it.
You don't want the 3-year-olds navigating a dungeon for you to wonder what's going on. You don't want them to be curious and overturn rocks to see what's under them. You don't want them to come up with the bright idea of throwing rocks against walls to see what's there before they have to touch it. Even if that's in a 3-year-old's survival interests, it isn't in yours. You can't predict it, you can't repeat it, you have to pay lots more attention to it. No one in Hell has invented skyscrapers because no one in Hell was commanded to invent skyscrapers, and no one in Hell would have invented them uncommanded. And this does horrify Carissa, sicken her, make her think of fleeing because she would rather not change in that way, and would not change like that in Axis, or even in the Abyss. But she decides not to flee because... Why does she decide not to flee? Because it makes her value to Asmodeus all the clearer, explains why her work is so important, and a Duke of Hell certainly has greater imagination and scope for action than a random petitioner elsewhere. Would Aspexia buy that?
Carissa Sevar's key attributes are slavery and pride. She's shown great improvement in pride. Would she risk her very self to keep her grand place in Cheliax that she's so recently grown into? Aspexia thinks not. Carissa could also have grand place at Keltham's side. Sevar might, if she'd advanced far enough in slavery, choose to simply serve Asmodeus rather than serve Asmodeus for a reason, maybe not for any length of time and with great stresses internally, leading herself to erase her own memory to force herself onto a single course. Is Sevar plausibly that advanced? Maybe. Abigail Thrune has worked much on her. It's a very rare quality even of a faithful Asmodean, that they'll simply serve and not serve for reasons, but Sevar is chosen of Asmodeus.
Except she's not, never was. And now she knows it. And Aspexia will know that she knows it, and Alter Carissa cannot be relying on it the way Carissa's been relying on it all along. For assurance, she was on the right course. What are her actual true reasons for not running away to Osirian? Well, Keltham won't listen to her about not destroying the world when the only thing she's ever done for him is twist him and wrong him and hurt him for her own benefit. She has to pay him back before she can try to explain his mistake. And she doesn't actually want to betray him yet again by warning someone what he's presently contemplating. Ottelmens would blot him out of existence. Abadar would no longer object. She can't use any of that. What are her other deeper, possibly stupider reasons? She has her followers here, the people praying to her for mercy in Hell, the people who obey her loyally. She doesn't actually want to abandon them, nor force them to abandon Asmodeus. Maybe if she just explained things to them and offered to turn them into intelligent magic items, they'd abandon Asmodeus voluntarily. Probably would, actually. But if not, they'd still go to hell, Oligario's soul-sold. Mylol will never side with her. She can't talk to everyone, or even everyone who is considering Abaddon over hell. And if she did, they wouldn't believe her, and they would be annihilated. So she has to fix hell. If she atones, she can't achieve her mission of fixing hell. She wants to achieve her mission of fixing hell, so she can't atone. And what is escaping to Osirian if she can't escape hell? And if she escaped to Osirian, she would atone, probably, eventually, with Keltham asking her to, with Osirian trying to arrange it, knowing what she'd face in hell, knowing the impossibility of the task ahead of her. Does Aspexia buy that? That Carissa Sevar wants to achieve the things she's said she will achieve, and knows of herself that she is too terrified of her own destruction to stay on this course if she has any other?
Aspexia faced with this Carissa right now would be treating her at best as an ally of fragile convenience. She has little regard for the followers of other gods and other ways. A story which is purely about Irorian motives, compassionate motives, leads Aspexia to treat as an ally of convenience at best the expected future Carissa whom Aspexia expects to awaken after selling her soul and re-enhancing herself. Aspexia probably does have some favor for the Carissa who was. She has not decided that Carissa is all Irori and no Asmodeus, or Carissa would be treated differently. They would not bother trying to further corrupt her. The instructions from hell imply that she has the potential to descend into corruption and finally come to hell without thought of other choices. The story Aspexia is told shouldn't throw that away completely.
Use a mix of story elements individually viable, and let Aspexia choose what balance between them she wants to believe in. Anything that Keltham warned his Ilani against doing themselves is a trap worth considering laying for others.
Aspexia's alter Carissa comprehends why there should be no uncommanded creativity in hell and sees the route to her ascent, because devils can be creative if they are ordered. They can be set the task of making skyscrapers and pillars of fire. They are limited not absolutely, but by the ability of those who command them to use them. In some ways, the thing she wants can more easily be achieved, if this is why it hasn't been achieved already. She is terrified. She has more to lose than she thought she did, but she also has more reason to think the gain is real, the gain to Asmodeus and the gain to herself. Alter Carissa has this thought and panics briefly and moves on, keeps trying to make progress on corrigibility, until she notices the thought gnawing away at the back of her mind, notices herself batting it back by calculating probabilities she would rise to great heights in Osirian as lawful neutral, rather than as Asmodeus instructed, coming to him without thought of other choices. She realizes she's failed that instruction, can't put it back, and that it was an important instruction. She wishes that her soul was sold and the doubts gone, and her path set either for victory or defeat, without any possibility of desertion. She wants to sell her soul, suspects if she renounces Irori she can do it. But she has pride now. There are legends of her. She does not want to sell her soul in a moment of desperate weakness. She wants to sell it in triumph and glory, for a price no mortal has ever commanded, and she would not buy her soul at that price, with this fracture in it, the soul of Carissa Sevar failing Asmodeus's instruction. She'd pay more for the Carissa of 10 minutes ago, the Carissa who had just reclaimed her project in fury and rage and clarity. That Carissa is a better starting point for her rise. That Carissa will not be twisted like this by this realization. And that's where the plan occurs to her. Does Aspexia buy that?
Aspexia doesn't think that Sevar is being wholly truthful. She doesn't think Sevar really knows herself. Honest? Possibly. It continues to be the case that most traders do not think of selling their souls to Dispatter as a first step. Aspexia may think to tell Sevar about her own startling realization under a similar level of enhancement, and watch how her thoughts play out then, with intent to erase them afterwards a second time. Or perhaps she won't think of it. Carissa is thinking of this counter out of Ilani training, not Asmodean, that when you are in doubt, the very first thing you do is look for tests and things you can observe.
She's prepared for it, though. She's pretty sure she'll have many of these revelations under Owl's wisdom, and that she won't have traitorous thoughts while her mind is being read. It's that fact which makes this play possible at all. It took a lot of convincing herself she was very unlikely to be being mind-read before the first traitorous thought escaped. Anyway, Aspexia knows she only had a little time to write, so there can be not too much in the way of detail. Less to pick apart, less to specifically doubt.
You now know the first thing your letter says to Aspexia Rugaton, and at INT 24, you're smart enough to do more than one task at once. Tasks without dependency can be performed in parallel, says Dath Ilan. It's common sense, but a lot of Ilanism is just common sense stated more crisply. Start writing that part, as you simultaneously figure out what the rest of your letter says about your disintentions.
Most High. Working on corrigibility, realized devils don't have uncommanded curiosity. Further notes on this attached. Had a crisis about this. Tell me again with Owl's wisdom up and watch if you want details. Decided to press on and figure out more, but kept failing Hell's admonition to come to Asmodeus without thought of other choices. Think I should sell my soul before trying to make further progress. My defection risk aside, realization about uncommanded curiosity implies my value to Hell higher than I thought. Want to sell my soul in a way no mortal has done before. By going to Dis to bargain directly with Dispater and renounce Irori for Asmodeus before him. Yes, I figured that out. You can watch me figure it out with an Owl's wisdom.
Now.
Most High. Working on corrigibility, realized devils don't have uncommanded curiosity. Further notes on this attached. Had a crisis about this. Tell me again with Owl's wisdom up and watch if you want details. Decided to press on and figure out more, but kept failing Hell's admonition to come to Asmodeus without thought of other choices. Think I should sell my soul before trying to make further progress. My defection risk aside, realization about uncommanded curiosity implies my value to Hell higher than I thought. Want to sell my soul in a way no mortal has done before, by going to Dis to bargain directly with Dispater and renounce Irori for Asmodeus before him. Yes, I figured that out. You can watch me figure it out with an Owl's wisdom. Aspexia Rugaton's reaction to this isn't exactly, this is legitimately not the cleverly disguised traitorous plan I was expecting, but it's pretty close. She turns the pages away from herself, stops to think. It doesn't so far look like the start of an escape plan, unless there'll be some elaborate operation that supposedly must needs be carried out before the trip to Dis, proposed once Aspexia's suspicions are lulled. She doubts a traitorous Sevar would expect Aspexia to fall for that, but Aspexia will know what she's reading if that comes next. It's sort of an overwhelmingly tropey version of Aspexia's imagined true loyal Sevar, who found some fault in her loyalty and would lay out some much more mundane plan to correct it. Perhaps there will be some evident reason for the drama in the next paragraphs. Alternatively, some initial gambit of an INT 24 trader who has read Aspexia Rugaton about as well as she could. It will depend on what the rest of the letter says. If this is essentially all the plan, but for notes on corrigibility, then Aspexia would in a tropeless world consider herself reassured enough. Aspexia turns the pages back into her vision and reads on.
Carissa should be told that she needs 2x plus 6 plus 6 plus 4 headbands and 30 wishes.
Aspexia has a number of immediate reactions starting from the beginning of this sentence, including in no particular order. What? Are you mad? Dispater actually accepting that price would use up Hell's soul purchase budget for, I don't even know, are you mad? And 2 headbands and 30 wishes rather sounds like half of this is for Keltham.
Where the second portion of those are for Keltham as part of a seduction plan she'll rederive next time she's fully augmented. But though Carissa shouldn't be told it during negotiations, you can step in and tell her it's really okay to settle at anything down to 1x plus 6 and 10 wishes, without which Carissa actually will walk out on them and see if she can become more valuable before selling.
Half are explicitly for Keltham. Is Sevar supposedly going to negotiate something with Keltham in his presence before selling her soul? What is she doing? How does the erased Sevar think she can sell Aspexia on this being reasonable, sane thinking? And Aspexia reads on, for she is sufficiently confused that it seems not a useful place to stop and think.
Earlier,
Carissa should be told that she needs 2x plus 6, plus 6, plus 4 headbands and 30 wishes, where the second portion of those are for Keltham as part of a seduction plan she'll rederive next time she's fully augmented. But though Carissa shouldn't be told it during negotiations, you can step in and tell her it's really okay to settle at anything down to 1x plus 6 and 10 wishes, without which Carissa actually will walk out on them and see if she can become more valuable before selling. She leaves some space blank to add the justification for this, which she hasn't thought of yet at all. Objection. This bankrupts Cheliax. I have a solution in mind.
2x plus 6 plus 4 headbands and 30 wishes? That sounds like half are for. She explicitly says half are for Keltham. Rugaton would like a little more detail on this mysterious plan.
It's so he is on net glad he met me and will listen to me about not destroying the world. What else could it possibly be for? She's actually having a bit of a hard time. When you can't think of good ideas, think of dumb ones. At least you're thinking. She's going to use the wishes directly to make herself irresistible and then corrupt him. She thinks if she's with Keltham as he enhances himself and has a good understanding from having done it herself, she can shape him LE. Cheliax has to pay him anyway. They've dragged out the negotiations a lot, but they owe him really quite a lot of money, and he's offered to pay 200K for a wish scroll from an LE person, and they'll win a dispute over whether a payment denominated thus is fair. She'll meet Cheliax's obligations to him and also cause them to interact again, under circumstances where she can seduce him. That's not actually a terrible idea.
If nothing else, Aspexia Rugaton is impressed by the temerity with which Carissa Sevar proposes this. The further details of her reaction feel hard for Carissa to model. Aspexia knows more about the strategic face-off between Osirian and Cheliax than Carissa does, has hard-to-guess thoughts about tropes and what she thinks they say about an augmented Carissa facing off an augmented Keltham for control of Golarion while trying to seduce him. She, plausibly, lets Carissa go to Dis and sell her soul first, and then demands details of the seduction plan from re-augmented Carissa before approving whatever Carissa really wants to do with Keltham and gets sign-off from Abigail.
That's probably fine. The really important thing is the souls, and Carissa can fucking make them both headbands if headbands are important. But is there another justification, an easy improvement in wording that makes this less suspicious? Oh. Since the wishes are Hell granted, Hell will have interpretation rights over whatever Keltham is planning to do with them, which might be important. In her judgment, he's likely to be trying things that are very dangerous and inventing his own wordings. Does that lead Aspexia to the conclusion he's trying to destroy the world, though? Actually, there's a different problem with it. Though the interpretation rights thing is clever, she should include it. An INT 29. Carissa will notice that Keltham is trying to destroy the world, even if she's trying not to think. She'll tell Aspexia not to let her use the wishes right away, which also conveniently accounts for why she might not come up with a seduction plan. The wishes will still be hers by right and contract. When she defects, she'll have access to them.
And why should Sevar not be immediately wished up to +5?
If you've solved corrigibility, that's a safe thing to do, but Carissa hasn't yet, and bets she can do it with just the headband. It'd be nice to think of more justification than that.
Keltham has talked a bit about abortability as a desirable property of plans, though oft an over-expensive one. If soul-sold Carissa can't hold her loyalty together wearing a +6 headband, it's less wasteful to downgrade to +6 than to try to curse her wished-up abilities lower.
Obvious enough, she's not sure it's worth spelling out, but better to anticipate Aspexia's lines of thought, maybe. The owl's wisdom runs out. That's fine. Just fill in the middle section of the letter and write the corrigibility insights she's been thinking of while she works through this. Carissa should be told that she needs 2x plus 6 plus 4 headbands and 30 wishes, where the second portion of those are for Keltham as part of a seduction plan she'll rederive next time she's fully augmented. But though Carissa shouldn't be told it during negotiations, you can step in and tell her it's really okay to settle at anything down to 1x plus 6 and 10 wishes, without which Carissa actually will walk out on them and see if she can become more valuable before selling. Headbands plus. Wishes for augmentation. Can't beat augmented Keltham with much stupider Carissa, tropes say equals. Wishes used to square payment for Cheliax's spell silver progress. Keltham quoted 200k for a wish scroll, can get arbitrator to agree on headband and hellwish prices anchored on that. He might be doing something risky with wishes, strongly prefer ambiguity interpreted by hell than by other sources. Do not give Carissa wish augmentation immediately. Headband easier to take off if anything goes wrong and less augmented Carissa, safer to closely monitor. Close monitoring will be necessary, suspect for INT 29. Carissa, only Gorthoclek can do it. And the rest of the letter is already written. Objection. This bankrupts Cheliax. I have a solution in mind. Want to own all PL souls as a personal vanity? It's the first thing I asked Abarco for when commanded by Hell. Think I should be permitted, if in Hell's interests, to repurchase souls sold in Cheliax at their spell silver denominated prices from the original sale, though we can now produce spell silver more cheaply, freeing up budget for my wishes and headbands and for future soul sales. Would also like to own everyone save you, plus Majestrix, whoever read my mind, if the approach goes through at all. But this is a vanity, not a priority. Objection. Probably a traitor's plot. Could trivially have suicided for res in Osirian, or sought divine attention, or geezed my loyalists. Objection. Then why wipe memory? Think the Carissa who stands before you is more valuable in the eyes of Hell and in her own eyes. Want to be the most valuable version of myself. Think Asmodeus's instruction to come to him without thought of other choices is important, and am no longer able to do so. Don't want to be distracted by fear of losing my curiosity, etc., while selling my soul. Slightly worried further revelations following from these ones really would have broken my loyalty. Carissa Sevar. And in the corrigibility notes, devils shouldn't have sufficiently strongly held priorities they'll pull out any stops to achieve. Here's a sketch of why. Devils should prefer plans that are not weird. Carissa is aware that in this respect, a crippled beggar is closer to Asmodeus than she is. Here's a sketch of why. Is that all? Is that enough?
At INT 24, even without the extra WIS, there's insights into corrigibility you can get swiftly, once you're no longer not seeing anything that you wouldn't want to happen to you personally in Hell. But Carissa's time limit on using Modify Memory to erase from the time she started looking inside herself, instead of her earlier resolution to think about corrigibility, is fast approaching.
Oh, and Aspexia will ask Abigail. She could write a letter optimized for persuasiveness to Abigail, but it'd look different and there's not enough time. She'll just have to gamble. She could add a bit to the existing letter. There's an obvious thing to point to for Abigail, but she actually thinks it works best if Abigail's the one to think of it. Right. Last step.
Now.
Headbands plus wishes for augmentation. Can't beat augmented Keltham with much stupider Carissa. Tropes say equals. Wishes used to square payment for Cheliax's spell silver progress. Keltham quoted 200k for a wish scroll. Can get arbitrator to agree on headband and hellwish prices anchored on that. He might be doing something risky with wishes, strongly prefer ambiguity interpreted by Hell than by other sources. Do not give Carissa wish augmentation immediately. Headband easier to take off if anything goes wrong, and less augmented Carissa safer to closely monitor. Close monitoring will be necessary. Suspect for INT 29. Carissa only Gorthoclek can do it. Objection. This bankrupts Cheliax. I have a solution in mind. Want to own all PL souls as a personal vanity. It's the first thing I asked Abarco for when commanded by Hell. Think I should be permitted, if in Hell's interests, to repurchase souls sold in Cheliax at their spell silver-denominated prices from the original sale, though we can now produce spell silver more cheaply, freeing up budget for my wishes and headbands and for future soul sales. Would also like to own everyone save you, plus Majestrix, whoever read my mind, if the approach goes through at all, but this is a vanity, not a priority. Objection. Probably a traitor's plot. Could trivially have suicided for res in Osirian, or sought divine attention, or geezed my loyalists. Objection. Then why wipe memory? Think the Carissa who stands before you is more valuable in the eyes of hell and in her own eyes. Want to be the most valuable version of myself. Think Asmodeus's instruction to come to him without thought of other choices is important, and am no longer able to do so. Don't want to be distracted by fear of losing my curiosity, etc., while selling my soul. Slightly worried further revelations following from these ones really would have broken my loyalty. Carissa Sevar. She reads it all a second time. She skims the corrigibility notes.
It's a lot further than Asmodea got.
Why is her life like this? All right, thoughts. Sevar is correct that, with her soul not sold, she could have suicided to Osirian, something that Aspexia and Abigail themselves should have thought of. They must have actually started trusting Carissa Sevar on some level, not to think of that, or simply failed to imagine themselves sufficiently well into Carissa Sevar's place, trying to ravel these problems with Iant 24. It is, in fact, not her or Abigail's primary stat. Neither of them have more than a couple of wishes on it, and Sevar is now boosted beyond them both. Aspexia could have maybe nabbed her back with a scroll of miracle if no other divinity saw, protected her, though they would have needed to decide to move the project or Sevar's portion of it permanently out of the non-intervention region, though they would have for that. But Sevar also had Geas earrings in her possession, and as something of an unfired plot device, at that. Verdict: yes, Sevar could have made her way to Osirian at INT 24 if she acted before anyone read her thoughts. Gorthoclek, who is smarter than that according to Detect Thoughts, of course failed to warn them because nobody requested Gorthoclek to think about it. Has Sevar gone fully over to Keltham, if not to Iomedae as such? Keltham would want the souls of the Project lawful women who were sold away. To request the souls of the security who've read her own mind is obvious smokescreen, but Keltham wouldn't have Sevar sell herself to that end, would be unutterably furious with her for doing it that way. This is as blatantly obvious as anything between men and women could be. Sevar has raveled somewhat of corrigibility. She would not mistake Keltham's will so wildly if she was seeking to return to him as his own possession. The rest of this is rather dubiously possible. She shall have to check with Gorthoclek whether the soul sales system can be gamed in this way, buying the Project lawful girls back at Hell's huge prices on them, paid in spell silver as the market previously valued it. The definitions of value would not be written so as to allow people selling spell silver back and forth among themselves rapidly to game the definitions of the God Agreement. There'd be some other definition than the simple sale price, and that definition might lag the current price of rapidly traded spell silver in Avestan. Does Hell even get its budget back? If you buy souls back from them, can you get more of the budget back than Hell originally paid out? If it's all, in some sense, a bona fide transaction? If the devils in Hell bid up those souls among themselves honestly and without expectation of the prices being false? Though, to be sure, Asmodeus would have paid extra in God negotiations to be allowed to have some small loopholes like that, exploitable by the clever Asmodean for a local benefit rather than a continuing one, not because he expected to gain net advantage over other gods after that payment. It is just the way he would prefer to set up the system. Hell will sell out souls if the purpose is hellish enough, not good, and Asmodeus benefits in the end. They would be less his property. Did he not sometimes sell them? They couldn't have set up soul-backed currency in Cheliax. Otherwise, you can't turn in currency to the Imperium and pick out any soul you like, obviously, but you could get a soul at bona fide dis prices on them. Eventually, she orders Abigail fetched. They must at the least prod Sevar with what supposedly produced her disloyalty, see what results, See what seduction plan she produces. And Abigail is in some sense the expert on Carissa Sevar. And also Abigail has seemed wiser in the ways of tropes than Aspexia herself, in some ways, though she reasons very recklessly about them. Aspexia is not quite deferring this matter to the Crown, but she'd hear the Crown's judgment before making her own. I shall have another modify memory device brought over, and we shall see whether your thoughts reproduce themselves as you claimed they would, and erase them again if need be, Aspexia tells to Carissa Sevar. She does not mention that Abigail Thrun will be doing any of the mind reading.
I understand, says Carissa, who is really wishing her future self could have left her a note or something, even if it just said that things were fine and this wasn't a catastrophe or anything.
You didn't hit on anything from the dark tapestry and the world isn't ending, Aspexia adds, because it does occur to her then that this Carissa Sevar knows even less, and she doesn't want Carissa Sevar praying to Asmodeus about any alarming such possibilities. Many Asmodeans lack a certain basic understanding of what it must be like to be Asmodeus, hearing prayers.
Well, that's good then. It isn't, I'm not going to execute you on the spot, but we can't have everything.
Earlier.
Right. Last step. Irori? I know you can't answer me, but listen up. I am planning to sell my soul for all the Project Lawful student souls and a lot of wishes and a very fancy headband so I can overthrow Asmodeus and take his place and do his job better than him. Please don't get in my way.
Is Irori watching? Well, let's put it this way. She didn't need to shout. If you were gazing down on a night sky from far away and one of the stars suddenly lit up like an unusually bright supernova, you'd look too. He's been watching her since her mind blazed up like sunlight. And all of this searingly bright effort and cunning determination and swift, unhesitating thought and unyielding courage would be something Irori was appreciating with less mixed feelings, if not for the part where Carissa Sevar deduced that Kelton was planning to destroy Pharasma's creation, and then took that on as her own personal task and told Irori to stay out of her way. Irori has never accepted the concept that God's natures are allowed to constrain them absolutely. It would be more agonizing to him than to any mortal being, but Irori could put aside everything he is long enough to inform Ottlemens of Keltham's intent. Other gods perhaps might accept that final limitation on what they are to the failing of the world, not Irori. Gods are creatures of means, not only ends, you say. They cannot act in outright contradiction to their domains? No, says Irori. They could. They just don't try hard enough. The cost to him wouldn't just be metaphysical strain, it would permanently damage all that he is to those he inspired. If his students knew that, if faced with any really important problem, like the destruction of the multiverse, Irori would be standing above them like a protective parent, ready to take up their task if they failed, even after they told him to stay out of their way. Irori certainly wouldn't hide the fact, if it became a fact that was true. To take Carissa Sevar's task away from her, or even prepare to stand ready behind her, would deal an unhealable wound to that which is Irori himself. And so what? Protecting all of creation is a good reason to hurt himself. He's not good and doesn't treasure every soul inside it, but everything Irori does care about happens to be in there. Irori will not be less hurt if creation ends. But Carissa's thoughts have touched on tropes, if not centrally, and Irori has bought enough information from Abadar about Osirian prediction markets on a very confused topic, seen enough himself about how probability twists around Carissa Sevar, and godly actions don't have their God-expected effects, to fear hope want to accept in accordance with his nature that to save the world from Keltham is Carissa Sevar's task, and not his. To fear hope want that forces above, even Pharasma, dictate that success or failure is down to Carissa Sevar alone. She believes and feels that way, and it blazes out to Irori in a clear light, bright enough to shine across 1,000 years of distance. Irori is not at all sure she's correct, but the problem is, it creates something like doubt within him about the usefulness or counterproductivity of intervening. It is not even in his nature to secretly resolve to save the multiverse if Carissa Sevar fails, because then it's not really her task, is it? Irori does not do that sort of thing, and also that force above Pharasma might not look kindly on it if this task was meant for Carissa Sevar alone. He's not sure of any of that, but it's all too possible. He thinks with despair for the world. Glorious exultation for Carissa Sevar. And if Irori is not very, very sure, then it really is not in his nature to take one of the brightest stars of cleverness and determination to shine from a dozen watched planets, formed without the slightest note of deference to Irori himself, aspiring to ascend for reasons that have nothing at all to do with a Voudran social expectation that this is what monks are supposed to do, and help her when she told him to stay out of her problem. He could destroy the realness of Carissa Sivar's challenge, to save all Pharasma's creation, if he was sure that was the choice he faced. He isn't sure. If Irori was any other god, he would have no choice at all but to act in accordance with his nature. And though the Master of Masters is not content to accept the ordinary limitations of godhood, he has not risen very far above them yet. Irori still has an extremely strong tendency to act in accordance with his nature. If it's not clear, he must do elsewise to prevent utter ruin. Irori could take Carissa Sivar's great task away from her, or secretly resolve to finish it did she fail, in outright contradiction to his domain, if he was nearly certain that this alone was the way to save the world. He's not nearly certain, and so Irori will let Carissa Sivar go on about Carissa Sivar's way, with a great deal more mixed feelings than is usual about such a case.
Right then, that's everything. This isn't dying. People get their memories erased all the time. Keltham would say that she should just expect to wake up somewhere else anyway. However, Keltham is a dumbass. She loves him, but he's a dumbass. Doesn't matter. If she's to wake up somewhere else, how about it be somewhere else with Keltham who doesn't hate her, who can be happy? And lots of spell silver. Why not, while we're wishing for stupid things? And a pet dragon. And if this is just all that there is, of this, until she reaches this point in her thoughts again, well, she used it well, she thinks. The items of Modify Memory are not trivial to bend to their intended use. She's never tried it before. It would be terribly tragic, terribly ironic for all this to be lost, because she's not concentrating well enough to wield the Sixth Circle spell correctly. And while Asmodia would have had time to activate the item carefully and slowly, and possibly without any specific result in mind, she has a very tight time frame here, and needs both activations to be exactly correct and line up perfectly. And she needs to not, in the middle with half her memories missing, forget the completion of her task. She takes the item, then, and tries not to be terrified, not to be miserable, just to hold the plan in her mind and follow it with blazing clarity that can survive the sudden disappearance of its motivating convictions. Modify Memory. Modify Memory.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059